Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to do something a little bit different once again. We're going to deviate from the Suzuki TS50 Gaucho project. We're going to go back to the 1973 Kawasaki F11 250. I have some more work to do on that bike. If you recall, if you watched the video a few videos back now, a few weeks ago, I had my buddy Pete from Ontario, and we talked about riding the bikes around the yard. And I noticed when Pete was riding the F11, it seemed to be smoking pretty heavily, more than I thought it should. So I thought the other day I would take the side cover off where the oil pump is mounted and take a look at the adjustment, see what was going on in there. And when I took that little access cover off, I was in for a little surprise. I found oil, two-stroke oil, in the cavity that didn't belong there. So I dove into it a little bit deeper, and today I'm going to share with you what I discovered and what the fix is going to be. So we're going to set up over here at the bench behind me, and I'll get in a little more detail of the particulars of what I found, and then eventually we'll move over to the bike itself and I will do the repair. Now I'm going to do this repair with the bike not on the bike stand because the TS50 is still on the stand, and I'm not going to swap them out for this. So I'm going to do the repair of the bike on the side stand, the F11 on the side stand. So I'll have to try to get the camera down in there so you can see what I'm doing. But let's set up over here at the bench and we'll get in more detail. What you see in the shot right now is one of the two oil feed lines that goes from the Mikuni oil pump on the F11 from the oil pump at this end. This attaches to the oil pump to the opposite end over here. I'm pointing to in my left hand that mounts the engine block. When I took the side cover off and I noticed the accumulation of two-stroke oil in the cavity itself, I also noticed the bottom of this fitting right here, the one attached to the pump, was damp with two-stroke oil. So my thinking initially was that the banjo fitting wasn't tight here. You know, I didn't have it quite tight enough. I'm usually very deliberate and careful when I tighten up these banjo fittings with crush washers, because you're typically going into soft material like aluminum, especially on the oil pump side. You don't have a lot of thread engagement and you don't want to strip out your oil pump, so I'm usually very careful with a light touch. I don't recall it ever leaking before, but I thought, well, you never know. So I went ahead and pulled initially this banjo bolt out to do a little inspection. And as I pulled the bolt out and freed it from the pump, I noticed or experienced this. As you can see, the fitting itself has failed, and we have complete failure, just cracked. I don't know if that's from vibration or I don't know what it's from, obviously. But it failed, and that was the source, I'm sure, of the leak. Now that doesn't address the, I don't think it's going to address the initial smoking problem. I still have to come back and figure out what's going on there, but first I'm going to fix this before we go any further. Now in terms of remedies, you know, there's several different options. One, of course, you can go to eBay or somewhere else to try to find a good used part. This has not been available from Kawasaki for years, I don't think, probably at least 40 years, maybe more. And you can find them occasionally on eBay though. You could perhaps make something up out of brake fittings, brake fitting banjo bolts and tubing. I've never done that before. In all the years I've been working on two-strokes with these types of pumps, I can only think of a couple of cases where I've had one of these oil lines fail or crack or become damaged in some way. And I've always been able to find either a good used one in OS on eBay or wherever. So I've never had to make a line like this up from brake parts, though it could probably be done. But what I chose to do was go to eBay and just buy a new one, a new NOS. And you can see right here, there's the part number. That is the correct number for this part. And here we have a brand new fitting, never been used. So we're going to go over to the bike now. We're going to install this new hose line pipe. I'm going to be doing it with the bike on the side stand, as I already alluded to. I think I alluded to the fact that the TS50 is still on the stand. I'm not going to take it off, so we're going to have to try to get the camera in so that you can get a shot or see what I'm up to when I go ahead and install this new oil line. It's very straightforward. It's a very simple process. And again, I still have to figure out why the bike appears to be consuming too much oil. But first we're going to fix this before we move on to that next piece. Whether I'm going to show the work on the over-oiling or not, I don't know at this point. I wanted to share this with you first in this video, so we'll get this done before we move on. So let's go over and set up. I've already got the new oil line. You can see it right here, already in place. I also pulled a new feed line coming from the oil tank. That's what I'm pointing to right here with my right index finger. This is a new line coming from the oil tank, and that will fit right here on this fitting right here, here when we're done. I thought while I was in here I'd go ahead and install a new line. The original, or the one that was on the bike anyway, was a clear plastic that had turned hard and yellow. I don't think that was original. I don't remember if I put that on or not anymore, to be honest with you. I think the original from the factory had a black hose similar to this one, and this is brand new material, and it is fuel and oil resistant and should last a long time. You can still get this from Kawasaki, I believe, this material, but this is aftermarket. I think this is from Motion Pro, but nonetheless. So we have to attach this oil feed line here at the top, right here I'm pointing to. That's where it goes into the engine, into the main bearings, and then here my right finger is pointing to where it attaches to the oil pump body. Here's the banjo bolts. I have them all cleaned up. Obviously this is a smaller one that goes at the pump. The washers, these crush washers, are Suzuki crush washers. I prefer the Suzuki ones because they have a rubber gasket, you can see probably right there, and they're perfect size. So those are from Suzuki. These two crush washers on a larger bolt are OEM Kawasaki, or at least I think they are. They are two different sizes because there's a shoulder on this bolt right here, you'll see. So the copper one fits up over like that, and then the small, or the larger rather, opening goes like that. These do not have a rubber gasket on them, so what I did, or what I normally do, is I just take them over to my surface plate. You can use a flat file as well and just clean up the surface. I rub them on either the file or the surface plate just to clean up. There's usually ridges that will get compressed into the material. Again, these are crush washers for a reason. When you snug up the bolt, you'll actually slightly deform the washer and creating a seal. What we're going to need to do is get a crush washer on each side of this larger fitting right here, and of course on each side of this one as well. The larger one on the inside is going to be the challenge only because it's so far in there. Now you'll notice my hands are clean, everything is clean. You've heard me preach about this before. When I'm working around engine parts like this, especially like oil, oil carrying components, oil pumps, oil lines, my hands are absolutely clean always. To get this crush washer, this is the inside crush washer that will go up against the engine right here. You can apply a little grease, a little oil, a little silicone grease, it doesn't make any difference, and put the crush washer up against either the engine block or on the inside of the fitting. I find it's easiest to put it on the inside of the, or rather up against the block. So I'm just going to use a little silicone grease right here. And you can use whatever you want. And that's just to allow me to stick that up against the block, something like that. Again, use whatever, if you want to use oil or grease, you can go ahead and do so. I just put a little bit on this copper washer as well, silicone grease, not absolutely necessary. We're going to go right through like that, and I'm just going to start that bolt. Now for the outer fitting right here, this one isn't usually nearly as hard because you can get at it. So I'm just going to fit that around like that. Make sure the washers in place. It's hard to do this and keep my head out of the way of the camera at the same time. And start that bolt as well. So now I've got both bolts started. Let me digress for a moment. You'll notice I've got the cable feed coming from the throttle out of the way. That will ultimately attach here. And of course, we talked about this oil feed line coming from the pump. I got that out of the way as well. So let me get my tools around here. I got them organized. I just got to change the sockets, and we're going to go ahead and tighten these fittings down. I typically use a 1/4 inch drive socket for tightening up banjo fittings on oil lines and oil pumps. I do not use 3/8. It's too big and massive. It's unnecessary to use something that large. This larger banjo bolt is a 14 millimeter head. The smaller one is 8 millimeter. And when I snug these up, again, I'm very careful. I usually support the oil line with my other hand. Hope that's not in the way too much here. And I just snug that fitting up, going by feel. You don't want to overdo it again. If anything, I'm going to go on the light side. I'd rather have it leak a little bit and require me to tighten it later than to over tighten it and then have a real problem with a stripped fitting, especially on the smaller one right here, because you're going into this pump body and you don't have a lot of thread engagement to work with. So you have to be delicate and you have to go by feel. And you notice how I'm handling the wrench like this. I don't want to be out here on the end where I can put too much torque on it. I'm handling it in close so I can minimize how much torque I'm putting on it. And again, these have rubber gaskets on them as well. And I think we've about got that ready to go. Later, I've reattached the oil feed line coming from the oil tank to the pump body fitting right here. I looked at the service manual or diagram for this, and it shows this oil feed line coming on the inside of this oil feed line. That's the new one I just attached. As you can see, that's how I installed it. You probably could have run it on the outside, but it would then have a kink in it like that. This is how the factory service manual showed it being installed. I also remounted the cable here. Let me just show this to you real quick. This is the cable coming from the throttle. Wrap it around this spindle right here, this thimble, this guide thimble, and then bring it like that. And you can see there's two marks right there that have to be aligned. One is on the pump body. The other one is on the control arm, and you adjust the cable to align those marks. Something like that. In terms of bleeding the pump, there is no bleed fitting on this pump that I can see or I could find referenced in the service manual. Typically what you do is you start the bike and you will open this arm up manually like this all the way until you see oil being pumped out of these lines and into the engine, and eventually the air bubbles should disappear. If I discover any leaks, most likely, of course, it would be here and here where I installed the new line. I can snug that up at the time. But that's the gist of how you would bleed the oil pump on this particular model anyway. You could loosen some of these fittings off, like this fitting here, to help purge the air out of the system if you wished. I typically don't do that. You could also add a little oil to the fuel if you wanted to, the gasoline, to ensure you got a premix running in the engine at the same time. And so I will add a little premix to the tank just to make sure the fuel has oil in it and the engine gets oil until I can purge these these lines of air. And I'll leave the cover off to do that. And I'll have to take the bike outside because I don't want it smoking up my shop. So we'll go ahead and get on with the bleeding of this. show the bleeding of the oil pump because I'm out in the gravel and I had to set my camera down or rig up some way of holding it, so I just twisted this arm up to full feed on the oil pump and ran the engine until I saw the air bubbles disappear out of these lines. All the air bubbles are gone. I have no leaks. I did put a light 50-to-1 mix in the fuel tank just in case. I have not addressed yet the original issue, which was what I determined was excessive smoking. The adjustment of the oil pump right here is now correct. I will not be able to check the cause of excess smoking for a while because I'm not going to take that fuel out of the fuel tank that's got the light premix, and I'm just going to run it the way it is. Probably there'll be enough fuel in there to run for the rest of the season, and I'll come back to it a later time if I determine it's still smoking. It runs okay. It's not following plugs, so I'm not going to obsess about it right now. I'm going to put the cover back on and ride the bike for the rest of the summer, and eventually, if I have to, I'll come back to figuring out the cause of the excess smoking. That's going to be it for the video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.